command, to rule, to pick us up from where he found us. We've seen his glory. We've seen his significance dwelling among us. And I don't know about you this morning, but it excites my soul to know that the glory of God can be seen and touched and felt and lived and experienced, because God is a holy God. And we've seen, we've received his glory that only came from the Father. It didn't come from what I created. It doesn't come from what I think about him. It doesn't come from the way that I define him. It comes from the Father. It comes from above. And then John says in verse 16, and from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. 4 ands this morning. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory. Glory that comes from the Father. Glory that is full of grace and truth. And then he says, and from his fullness we have received grace upon grace. The understanding here that John is giving us is that because of the birth of Christ, now from the fullness of Christ, the fullness being all that he is, all that dwells inside him. If you don't mind, turn for just a second to the book of Colossians, Colossians chapter 1. Look at what is said here in Colossians 1 about this fullness of Christ. He says here, first of all, this is indeed Paul speaking. He tells us in verses 9 through 14, he tells us first that Paul says, this is what I'm praying for you. Regarding the fullness, I pray that you would have this fullness, that you would have this fullness. We have not ceased to pray for you. He says in verse 9 of Colossians chapter 1, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will, that you would have all spiritual wisdom and understanding so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. May you be strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, for all endurance and patience with joy, giving thanks to the Father who has indeed qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints of light. He has delivered us from this domain of darkness and transferred us into his kingdom. He's forgiven our sins. And Paul says, I'm praying that each of you would receive the fullness of God. That as we go into a new year, as we celebrate the birth of Christ and what he has done and how he's connecting to our lives, we have now all received from his fullness. And Paul is saying, I pray that you get the fullness of God, that you receive it. Don't just be a church attender in 2018. He says, don't just show up on Sunday mornings, but it says, my prayer for you is that you would receive all the wisdom and all the knowledge, all the fullness of God. Because if we're walking in the fullness of God, then our anxiety has to find somewhere to go. Our